Good morning, theology class. I trust by now you've heard that we are not going back to school for the rest of the year, which is a pretty big bummer. But I suspect you're kind of getting into a groove in the way that you're doing online school, and I hope that's been beneficial to you. I suspect you're probably also a little bit bored. I hope that improves, but I also invite you to keep your nose down, keep working as unto the Lord. Most of the things we're talking about in work in this unit right now, I kind of have in mind as you anticipate the careers and callings that you head into. But they're most certainly applicable to the schoolwork that you have been in for quite some time and you continue to engage in online style. So especially today, we're going to talk about how the brokenness of the fall has tainted work. So perhaps you can keep one eye on your future work that you hope to do, but also keep an eye on the schoolwork that sometimes is great and fulfilling and sometimes is broken and difficult and painstaking. So this is Theology of Work, theology class for April 27th through May 1st. You're going to finish the Sayers essay this week, pages 10 through 12. Begin where you left off last time with the line, "It is your business, you churchmen, on page 10. That would be at the, sorry, I didn't plan for this, at the basically the top of page 10, roughly speaking. I will attach that to the email. For some reason, it seems that many of you did not get my email last week, which is kind of strange. I carbon copied myself on it, and I actually got my own email. But that being said, I'm sorry that you may not have received it. Nevertheless, this video will always be on YouTube, and all these instructions are always there. So they're also in RenWeb. So even if you don't get my email, that should not keep you from being able to do the work. And if you need the document, you can always go back and look at an old email that should have the document uploaded to it. What I'd like for you to do, based upon your reading of that last part of Sayers' essay, is the following. Sayers says, quote, "The only way to serve the community is to forget the community and to serve the work," end quote. What do you think she means? You can dig into that by reading what she says, and she kind of explains what she means. But I want you to tell me what you think she means, and do you agree or disagree, and explain. Maybe you can bring in some sort of specific practical thoughts as you think about your own work. Write a full page as if it were double-spaced. You guys have done quite well with this, I would say. Of all my classes, you all as a whole have by far turned in the best work. So I appreciate that. And as usual, send that to me by Friday at 3 p.m. This, as I suspect you've grown accustomed to, as have I, is the video for theology class for the week. You're going to leave a comment at the end, but I'll tell you a bit more about that in a little while. A reminder of where we've been. We talked about some of the, quote, heresies of work, ways that people think about work wrongly. We consider the design of work in the Garden of Eden as God is the chief paradigmatic worker, and we imitate and follow him. And thus, all types of work, from the greatest to the least, have inherent and great dignity because they are made by God, and we were made to do them. We looked at different kinds of work, two specifically, work as cultivation, repair, maintenance, and development as we move out into the world and work on it to imitate God, to make something of the world that is before us. And then we looked at another sort of type of work. You might say it's the end of work, work as service, work that furthers the world, serves people, It tends to make the world, and specifically the people in the world and their lives, better. It serves people. And I invited you to think about some of the ways that your work, perhaps in the future, is the work of cultivation and is the work of service. But now we're going to switch gears and talk about how the fall has twisted and broken work. We're going to do this because I think it helps us to rightly understand frustrations that inevitably arise when we work. I don't know about you, but my everyday work is often delightful and sometimes difficult. I suspect all of you have encountered difficulty in your schoolwork at some point or another. And understanding how the fall has broken our work is needful because it can be tempting to hate and despise the work itself, as opposed to having a proper understanding of why we're experiencing frustration in work. We need rather to lament the fall's impact on work rather than despising the work itself. So we're going to explore three different ways that work has been broken by the fall. First of all, it becomes fruitless. It becomes, secondly, pointless. And finally, it becomes selfish. And eventually, we'll talk about how the gospel changes the way that we can work and ought to work in light of these brokennesses. So, I'd like to begin considering Genesis 3:18 to 19, which will know 8 to 19, which will no doubt be familiar to you. As they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." But to the woman he said, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you." And to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." It goes on to talk about how Adam and Eve will return to the dust. What do you think are some ways that this story of the fall, and particularly its effects, these are the effects of the fall, what do they have to do with work? Well, I suspect you can see the relevance of the last part where the ground is cursed because of Adam's sin. But I want to point you first to the top part and some of the first and more initial effects of the fall. First, notice that shame enters the world. They realized that they were naked. Keller says shame is that sense of unease with yourself at the heart of your being. That sense of unease with yourself at the heart of your being. You and I have a deep restlessness in us that can take several forms. And they're all, in this particular case, I want to relate them to work. But see how shame enters the world in the heart of Adam and Eve. And I want you to see some of the things it brings with it into our lives, and consider how they might lead us into false approaches to work. First, this shame brings with it a guilt, a pressing guilt on our souls that leads us to strive to prove ourselves, to demonstrate and prove that we are worth something, precisely because we feel this sense of guilt and failure from the shame. So guilt comes in and it leads us to strive to prove ourselves. Think about how that may lead us to work for reasons that do not align with cultivation and service and glorifying God. So proving ourselves is one of the derivative effects of this guilt and shame that has come into our lives. Second, consider that there's this spirit of rebellion that is sort of a reaction to our guilt and shame, and an assertion of our independence. This deep restlessness in us leads us to sort of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and head out into the world dependent upon self, with a great sense of independence. And it perhaps can lead us to make our own meanings in the midst of our work. We begin to work, as it were, on an island of self-manufactured meaning. This shame and restlessness, thirdly, leads many of us to kind of a default to compliance and the need to please others. Because we feel the sense of inadequacy, our lives become one long string of people pleasing and compliance. Think about how that might affect your work. Perhaps you might be pursuing the work that your parents have always told you you ought to do. Perhaps you are just kind of doing the next thing in life because that's what everyone else is doing. Perhaps at the root of many of these symptoms is this sense of shame and guilt and restlessness and inadequacy that Adam's sin and our sin has brought into our lives. That is always going to be rumbling underneath the surface as you and I head into our work. I feel that even as a teacher, that this deep sense of unease with myself and restlessness affects everything that I do, and it leads me to work in ways that are not the best ways. It leads me to pursue ends and goals in my work that are not God-glorifying ends of cultivation and service. Next in this passage, I want you to see down in the poetic portion that there are a couple of major ways that the fall has affected us. The two great realms of life, you might say, are cursed: love and work. Think about how most of your perhaps this wouldn't be too bold to say, most of our problems in life are in the realm of love and relationships, and in the realm of our everyday work. And both of them here, both through the lens of the woman and through the lens of the man, are broken. And notice how they both are marked by the words pain and toil. Eve is told, in pain you shall bring forth children. I'll multiply your pain in childbearing. And then Adam is told, in pain you shall eat of the ground all the days of your life. So both the realm of love and relationships and the realm of work and labor are tainted by pain and toil and difficulty. We're going to leave the other for another time, particularly Senior Bible is where we will engage with the realm of love and relationships. For now, we're just going to consider what God says to Adam here, which is not just to Adam. Perhaps there's a primacy to what he says to Adam, but what he says here is the effect on all kinds of work and all kinds of toil and all kinds of labor in the world for all people. If you look in verse 17, to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, quote, you shall not eat of it, end quote. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field, but by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. Notice a few things about this passage. First, kind of jumps off the page. Work is now going to be marked by thorns and thistles. And yet, we'll come back to this part, he also tells Adam, you will eat. He says, you shall eat the plants of the field, and you shall eat bread. And yet, at the same time, it will be with sweat, and it will be with thorns and thistles. What does this have to do with work? Well, I think this is Keller makes this point in a whole chapter in his book. This phrase, thorns and thistles, represents, in part, the reality that work now becomes, at least partially, fruitless. What exactly does it mean that work becomes fruitless? Now, when I use this phrase, I'm not going to mean absolutely all the time in every way 100% fruitless. But all work, for the most part, at all times, is tainted by a sense of fruitlessness. What exactly does that mean? It means there is always going to be at least some gap, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, between what we want to accomplish, what we desire to accomplish, what we should accomplish, and what we do, in fact, accomplish. There's always going to be a gap between these two things. It might be a gap in the midst of the job that you really want to do, or it might be a gap because the work that you're doing right now isn't necessarily what you want to be doing. And so inherently there's this gap between what you desire to accomplish and what you're actually accomplishing. I would suggest that many of you feel that strongly right now in your school. This gap penetrates to your heart. It penetrates deep in your heart because you feel that much of the work you're doing right now is not what you actually desire to accomplish. And so there's this gap in your heart, and it frustrates you. And what I want to invite you to see is that is perhaps not a strike against the value of the work that you're being asked to do right now, but it is of the fall. Where does this gap come from? It may perhaps come from a shortage or an insufficiency in our ability. You may feel this as a student. There may be a subject in which you're weaker than another subject, and your ability means that what you desire to accomplish and do always seems to be less than what you actually do accomplish. And most people, in fact, I would say everyone, experiences this sense that my ability in the work that I want to do, it keeps me from accomplishing everything that I want to accomplish. I'm just not perfect at the work that I'm doing. And that's frustrating. It creates sorrow, and um, it's a real bummer on many days of my own work, which is ironically what I'm doing right now. Um, my ability does not fit perfectly, squarely with what I want to accomplish. My assignments are not as creative as they should be. I am not as winsome as I should be. There is this a gap in my ability between what I want to accomplish and what I actually do. Perhaps this gap is fostered by some sort of environmental factors. The environment we're sort of working in gives resistance. There's pain. There's envy with colleagues. There's fatigue, just general fatigue at this labor. There's perhaps interpersonal conflict that throws a wrench in the machine of what we ought to be accomplishing. Perhaps there are unexpected problems that seem to come out of nowhere. Perhaps there's a virus that begins to pervade the world, and it throws just about everyone's work into a knot. Perhaps for the farmer, there's a storm or a drought that ruins something, or it gets in the way of what you're seeking to accomplish, and that is completely out of your control, and it widens this gap. That is a result of the fall, and it is lamentable, and it is something that we can have appropriate sorrow over. Perhaps others are sinning against you in your work, and it is widening this gap. Perhaps others are just beating you at your work, and it's actually decreasing and diminishing what you want to and what you should accomplish. So consider the reality of the fruitlessness of work in the world. What we do end up producing and accomplishing is almost always less than what we desire to accomplish and what we ought to accomplish. Now, for your comment this week on this video, I would like for you to leave one or two ways that school for you feels fruitless. Don't answer that school feels pointless. That's going to be what we'll explore in a second. But rather, leave a comment describing one or two ways that school can feel fruitless, like spinning your tires, like high work, low output, spending a lot of energy into something, seeking to accomplish something, and yet what comes out on the other end never seems to be fitting for what is being put into your work. I think this reality can sometimes lead us to, Keller, I believe, draws this out in his book as well. It can lead us to two potential extremes. Some of us can perhaps be idealists, where we think we're going to change the world, make a difference, accomplish something great and new, and have an incredibly highly successful career, become the world's best blank. Perhaps others of us become cynics, supreme cynics, say things like and feel things like, nothing's really going to change that much. Work is too hard. Don't get your hopes up. Do what it makes. Do what you have to make a living, but don't really let yourself care too much about your work. And these kind of flow from the fact that we were made to work, and work is broken. And we're caught in this ping pong match between idealism and cynicism. And the Christian worker grows in his or her ability to hold these two poles in tension. Work is good, we were made to do it, and simultaneously work is broken and tainted. And they reflect the reality that work will have thorns. And simultaneously, the earth produces food. And so the work that you and I will do and are doing is always going to have these two realities in it. And having an understanding of both of them, the design of work and also the brokenness of work, will help us, will guard us from these two potential extremes of mere idealism or mere cynicism. It will help us, it will keep us from despair, and it will keep us from kind of a naive, unhealthy optimism without a sense of lament at some of the ways that the world is broken. So the earth does indeed produce both thorns and food. So first, our work, because of the fall and sin, becomes fruitless. But it also becomes pointless. And I want you to consider the distinction between these two concepts. First, this sounds like a simple question, but I really want you to ponder it. What exactly is the point of work? Perhaps think about the work you're doing now, perhaps the chores that you do around the house, or particularly I want you to think about the work that you desire to do. Maybe think about the work that your parents do. What is the point of work? The fruitless concept meant that most people never quite achieve what they aspire to. The pointless point means that those who do not experience satisfaction and fulfillment that they desire. The pointlessness of work means that even at times, even when we do achieve what would seem like success in that work, it so often does not bring satisfaction and fulfillment with it. So work can become pointless, and it infects so much of what we do. Again, this is not a universal 100% pointlessness, but to the extent that our work is broken by the fall, it has the potential to become pointless. Listen to the wise sage in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. This book, Ecclesiastes, it explores the ultimate meaninglessness of a life that is built on learning or pleasure or work. So the writer explores a life lived in the pursuit supremely of learning, a life lived in the pursuit supremely of pleasure, and then a life lived supremely dependent on and founded upon work. And he explores the meaninglessness, what we here might call the pointlessness of living life ultimately for work. Listen to what he says. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Consider the man imagined here in this passage. Look at verse 26. To the sinner he has given. In other words, to the one not working under the lordship of God for his glory in the pursuit of cultivation and service, what this person is left with, and this is how sin has broken the point or the goal of work, it simply becomes the business of gathering and collecting, of doing, of almost sort of a mindless meandering about. He calls it gathering and collecting, doing for the sake of getting. For a time, seems to be full of meaning and pleasure and purpose, but in the end, it proves pointless because in the end, one just gives everything that one has gained to someone else. And the writer of Ecclesiastes calls this vanity, striving after wind. Most people tend to choose their work, I would say, for the wrong reasons, the wrong purposes, the wrong points, the wrong ends, the wrong telos. And that ends up leading to all sorts of dissatisfaction and pointlessness. Pursuing a good thing for the wrong end. Think about this. Pursuing a good thing, yet for the wrong end, will eventually lead to great heartache and disappointment. You all know this. If you pursue a girl or a boy, in and of themselves, a good thing. If you pursue them for the wrong end, it only and ever ends in heartache and disappointment. The same is true for pursuing a house for the wrong end, or a truck, or any other thing for the wrong end. It eventually leads to heartache and disappointment, and this is no less true of a job. Listen to the way Sayers puts it in one passage. A very able surgeon put it to me like this. What is happening is that nobody works for the sake of getting the thing done. The actual result of the work is a byproduct. Instead, the aim of the work is to make money or to do something else. Doctors practice medicine not primarily to relieve suffering, but to make a living. The cure of the patient is something that happens on the way. A byproduct, she says. Lawyers accept briefs not because they have a passion for justice, but because the law is the profession which enables them to live. The reason why men often find themselves happy and satisfied in the army is that for the first time in their lives they find themselves doing something, not for the sake of the pay, which is miserable in the army, but for the sake of getting the thing done. Isn't that an amazing thought? And her point by implication is that when she says that those who are in the army have a great deal of satisfaction and happiness and fulfillment, is precisely because the pay stinks, and yet on the other hand, they're actually doing something that is worth doing for the thing itself, namely winning a war, defending their brothers, defending the homeland. And by implication, the other pursuits that she mentioned above, doctors and lawyers and others working simply for pay, are experiencing a great deal of dissatisfaction. And it's precisely because their work has become pointless. The point of their work has become pay, leisure, comfort, and security. But ironically, those points, because they were not the ends for which God made us to work, become hollow, shallow, dissatisfaction, dissatisfying, and pointless. This is what we mean by work becomes pointless. The ends for which we are toiling through our work prove to be foundationless, And one has the potential to wake up one day realizing, oh my goodness, my work ultimately, since I'm only doing it for money or pleasure or the weekend or reputation, is in fact itself pointless. And Sayers is drawing us back to the point of work. The true point of work that God has given to us is the work itself, its excellence, its quality, um, its inherent goodness as cultivation and service. So, what are the implications that this might have on how we actually choose the work that we're going to do? Consider three questions you might ask. First, what work can I do well? What kind of work have I actually been gifted for? Sayers calls this being fit for a certain kind of work. So what work can you do well? Second, what work do I want to do? This may not always be your chief guiding principle, but I think knowing that God made us to work, and knowing that God has actually fit each one of us for a particular kind of work, I think this is a legitimate question to ask amongst the others. What kind of work do I actually want to do? It is entirely possible, and so many people do this, to pursue work that you don't really actually want to do simply because it has the power to create the kind of life that you think you ought to have. And this idea pulls us back to considering the kind of work that both God made us to do well and that we want to do. And then particularly with regard to this issue of fruitlessness and pointlessness, does my work serve the world? Answering that question is going to draw us away from the pointlessness of work and inject it with meaning. This reminds me of a story that I heard from a friend one time. He was interviewing for a sales job. I forget what he was selling, but he was going to an interview, and the job was for a sales position. And an interviewer asked him, told him, "Hey, first thing I want you to do is sell me this lamp. See this lamp right here on my desk? Sell it to me." And what my friend did was he said, "Well, the first thing I would ask is, do you need this lamp? And why do you need this lamp? Tell me about that." And I'm sure the interviewer was flabbergasted and perhaps not pleased. But I think my friend was absolutely right. What he was trying to say was, I do not want this job of sales to simply lead people to deeper and more entrenched consumerism. I don't want people to buy a lamp if they don't need it just because they get a hit out of buying something new. I want to actually sell a lamp, a quality lamp, to someone who needs it. And that's what this last question is getting at. Does my work serve the world, or does it have the potential just to lead people into pursuing ends that are not good for them? Does it appeal to the worst aspects of people's character, or does it make the world and its people better? Perhaps if you're struggling with the work that you want to do, discerning the work that you want to do, or perhaps you've known what it is, but there are these haunting questions and fears in the back of your mind about it. Perhaps these three questions, can guide you into what you want to do. What work can you do? What are you able and gifted to do? What do you want to do? What is it that you desire to do? And does your work serve the world? Each one of these questions kind of provides a good check on the others. I hope this has been beneficial to you. If nothing else, I desire that you have grown a little bit in your ability to discern why you might experience frustration and difficulty and pain and toil in the labor and work that you are doing and in the work that you will do one day, so that it will keep you from pointing the finger at the work itself, but that you might be able to consider how work has actually been broken by the fall. That's something to lament, but it's something that we can endure for the sake of continuing to work hard at the work which God has given us to do. Don't forget to leave a comment at the end and email me if you have any questions. Thanks, theology class. Love you guys.